समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
In addition to my usual notes on yellow pages, I'm also holding these printouts printed on both sides. What are these printouts? These are basically Trump's tweets and statements, or posts, I should say, because he puts many of those on Truth Social. His posts and statements between 12th of June and 23rd of June. That is just over 11 days. These are his flip-flops, turnarounds, offers of peace, actions of war, justifications for war, justifications for seeking peace, everything. If you read all of this, then you might say, as many people are saying, is this guy a madman? Is the world dealing with a madman? Now, if you read up on that, as I did, in fact, it's quite a rational idea to think of a leader as a madman. Because Madman Theory, what's the Madman Theory? Madman Theory is something that is established in political science through centuries. And who's the one that founded it? No, it wasn't Kautilya. It was founded by Niccolo Machiavelli, at least in recorded history. I don't know, with Kautilya people can pull out many quotes, maybe somebody would. If you do, please do let me know and I will repeat it, I will give you credit. But in recorded history, I find from Niccolo Machiavelli, who said in 1517, he laid out the theory, saying that in some circumstances, it's a very wise thing to simulate madness. The modern notion of this madness, a leader with madness. First of all, let me also explain to you what is the easiest explanation for a leader acting with madness. That is, by acting in a highly volatile way, they can frighten the opponents into conceding. Right? That's a little bit like the old Steve Cohen line on the Pakistanis as well, that Pakistan negotiates with the world by putting the gun to its own head. Right? Listen to me or I will blow my brains out and everything will get messed up and you have to clear up that mess. You may be a part of it. They play that game periodically, and that's why you find that any time they have any conflict-like situation in India, within the first 12 hours, they don't do nuclear saber rattling. They start saying this is a nuclear weapon zone, anything could happen, catastrophe could happen. That is to draw global attention. Still nobody in India is convinced that Pakistan is led by a madman leader. It is still seen to be run by people who are also interested in their own survival first, right? So they are not going to take you down the tube with them. However, there have been leaders in history who fit that expression, and probably that's what Trump wants to be known as. So in a 2024 dinner, and some of these detail we have the courtesy of a paper in Foreign Affairs magazine by Roseanne McManus, who is associate professor at Penn State University. So Trump, during the campaign in 2024, at one of the campaigns, was asked that what will he tell Xi Jinping so he does not invade Taiwan. And he said, and I quote from the article, "I won't have to because Xi Jinping respects me and he knows I am effing crazy," right? He used the full expression. I am just saying I am effing crazy. That's what he said about himself. So he's building for himself that madman image that you don't know what I can do. I can do anything. So be reasonable, do it my way. How did this idea evolve? So I took you back to the 16th century, early 16th century, 1517, Niccolo Machiavelli, but see its reiteration in the 60s. In the 50s and the 60s, John Foster Dulles, the legendary American Secretary of State of a long tenure, after whom the international airport at Washington, D.C. is named. He described Nikita Khrushchev in the 1950s and 60s as being irrational and Sometimes he suspected it could be deliberate as well. However, his description, Dulles' description of Khrushchev was he's intoxicated most of the time or essentially emotional. Both quotes from him from the archives. Just after him, as the Soviet bloc and the American bloc, Warsaw Pact and NATO, for example, they arrived at a mad situation. That is mutually assured destruction. So both had the nuclear weapons. That brought about a balance of power and also ensured rationality, because each side knew that anybody who used a nuke, there will be total destruction also from the other side. So this was a mutually assured destruction. Now, who would get over a balance or a calm that was produced by this mad? It could only be another madman. So Khrushchev it was who started this first, and then during the Vietnam War, and this is Daniel Ellsberg, scholar from Rand Corporation, again from Rosie and McManus's article. So Nixon told his chief of staff that he has to convey a message to the North Vietnamese that he is stark, staring mad, so they should yield or risk being annihilated. He said also that they should know, I quote again from him as recorded by Haldeman, I call it Madman Theory, Bob. That is him speaking to his chief of staff. I call it Madman Theory, Bob. North Vietnamese can't restrain me. I have my finger next to the nuke button. They should know that. Now, obviously, it did not work with the North Vietnamese. This doesn't always work, but it never stops people from trying. The Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, both sides chickened out. American side, that's Kennedy, and also the Soviet side, say Khrushchev. But at the same time, Khrushchev got some bit of a concession, probably because he had that irrational reputation. And that concession was that the Americans agreed not to base nuclear missiles in Turkey, a member of NATO, which would have put them very close to the Soviet Union on the other flank of the Soviet Union, not on the European flank of the Soviet Union, but on the Eurasian flank of the Soviet Union. The 70s and the 80s had their own share of people who were called madmen. We know that Saddam Hussein was called madman. He was described as somebody who had this messianic ambition for unlimited power. He wanted to control all of the Arab world to begin with and be the strongest power there. Didn't work out for him. Then Gaddafi. Ronald Reagan had described Gaddafi as a mad clown and an unpredictable fanatic. Caspar Weinberger, who was Secretary of Defense with Ronald Reagan, he became the first American Secretary of Defense to visit India after decades. That's when Rajiv Gandhi was in power. He, in fact, said, and it is recorded, that he thought that Gaddafi suffered from an incurable venereal disease or sexually transmitted disease, which made him so irrational and which made him prone to such moods and such mad behavior. Now that we understand the theory, now you can say Hitler was a madman, right? He thought nothing will happen to him. Initially, when he gave the world the impression that he just wants to expand his territories a little bit, create a larger Germany, that's when the British and the others sort of decided to put up with his hunger, thinking that he just wants this, he'll be okay. But he did prove to them, because they were worried that if they don't let him take what he wants, then he might indulge in madman behavior and sink Europe into a terminal war. However, they made concessions to him, and yet he went ahead and did what he had to do. Again, a madman. In his case, the theory did not work, and yet it doesn't stop people from following it. See, now jump to the current period. Jump to as we enter the last week of June. How do things look like in the world? There was Donald Trump, who said for weeks that there should be peace, there should be a solution in the Middle East. He first wanted Bibi Netanyahu to have a ceasefire in Gaza. Then he wanted him to fight even more in Gaza. Then he said he was resuming nuclear reconciliation talks with Iran after having shredded JCPOA, because that nuclear agreement with Iran limiting enrichment had been signed under Obama. So he has shredded that in his previous tenure. Now he started the same talks. Then during the talks, at some point, his special envoy Steve Witkoff said this will go on for 60 days. And he did not want Netanyahu to go and attack Iran because he really wanted that peace deal, because he also wants a Nobel Prize, Sometimes I think they should give him the Nobel and be done with it. What's with it? They've given the Nobel to so many nutcases, including that Aung San Suu Kyi, that warmonger Ethiopian Abiy, and to Obama for doing nothing. Trump obviously thinks that if Obama could get it just for delivering a few nice speeches, at least I might have some achievements on my CV. Nevertheless, let's come back to the theme that we are talking about. This is a deliberate effort on the part of Donald Trump. Rather than be embarrassed about his inconsistencies, what you and I as ordinary mortals may see as his inconsistencies, he thinks it's his style. So there is something that is said during his first campaign. Campaign as in when he ran for his first presidency. He said, we must as a nation be unpredictable. You would have thought that the biggest superpower in the world, the only superpower in the world, should be predictable. So all of the world can be stable. But he put a premium on being unpredictable. And then I told you, then at a dinner in 2018, he said that there's no harm being a madman or sounding like a madman because that keeps people guessing. It also makes people concede your demands. Then what he said in a 2024 dinner on Taiwan, I told you, he said that he said that I don't have to convince Xi Jinping. He respects me. He will not invade Taiwan because he knows I am effing crazy. Now, in the month of June, and all these statements and tweets and posts I'm hanging on to are from the month of June. J.D. Vance, who is now vice president with Trump, he had seen this trait exactly a year back. Speaking in June of 2024, he had said that both supporters and detractors of Donald Trump will see his behavior as unpredictable. However, it works to the benefit of the United States of America. And that is the method that Trump has put on display all of these months. He's just been sworn in president or inaugurated as president for less than 6 months yet. And yet what has he done? He has appended every existing geopolitical equation. He seems to be super focused on his internal politics all the time. He's addressing his base all the time. At the same time, the largest impact he has made is on the rest of the world outside, to such an extent that he's now even dividing up his base. Now his base, the mega base, did not want America to get involved in any wars outside. In fact, Trump's election promise also was that I am the president who never starts a war, who never sends troops into a war. At the same time, when he was president the last time, he carried out the assassination of, or he authorized the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the number 2 in IRGC. He also authorized the killing of the ISIS chief at that point of time. He also authorized the missile attack on Syria when the regime used chemical weapons, or at least the news was that the regime used chemical weapons against its own population. So he's not averse to doing any of that. It's just that in his case, it's a bit like he says one thing but does something else. And that is what the rest of the world has now learned to deal with. So he can say one day, I want Canada to be my 51st state. He will say it in the presence of the new Canadian Prime Minister as well, the new Prime Minister as well as the outgoing Prime Minister. And yet he will visit Canada as a sovereign country for G7. Because in his worldview, and I'm trying to rationalize what might look irrational, right? Raving irrational. In his worldview, this might be his way of pushing these countries, allies of America, into spending more on their defense, because he thinks they are freebooters. They want America to spend on defense and they want Americans to come and protect them like the sheriff of the world, but they are not spending on their own defense. And you can see the impact of that. All the European countries, members of NATO, and definitely Canada, Japan, they've all upped their defense budgets. Not all to the extent where Trump wants them to up, but he wants defense budget to go to 5% of GDPs and all, and these are large GDPs, but yet they are all upping it. So he's getting some buck for the bank. I'm reversing that metaphor, because bank is the statement he makes, right? And buck is what these countries are now spending additionally on their defense. You will also find that India, if India has to remain a credible member of Quad, India will have to spend a lot more on its defense, because if India can be seen as a kind of a military peer of Pakistan, at least over a three-day period, or a near peer of Pakistan, then that affects India's credibility as a Quad member. What does India bring? How much weight does India bring to the Quad grouping? So he is accordingly putting pressure on all his friends and allies that don't take America for granted. That's his worldview. The friends and allies don't all see it that way, but that's his worldview. That's the reason I said we are trying to rationalize what looks to be irrational, particularly to his friends, but also to his adversaries. Look at the Iranians. Until the other day, he said, I have no plans to strike right now. Maybe I will not. I don't know. I will take my time deciding. Maybe 2 weeks. So possibly somebody in Iran might have thought that it is time. He wants Netanyahu to carry on doing what he's doing, and Netanyahu does not have the equipment, the bombs of the size that can cut through these mountains. Maybe his idea was to put them at ease or make them complacent. However, we all woke up on Sunday morning and found out that he had bombed exactly the same mountains at Fordo. We've seen more examples of this if I read international media, particularly American media, that follows him very closely. On South Korea's trade negotiations with South Korea, Axios reports that he had his people tell the South Koreans that, and I quote, this guy is so crazy, he could pull out any minute from trade talks. Similarly, earlier, his famous love affair with Kim Jong-un, right, the little rocket man as he called him, in his first term, he first let him know that he will face all of America's fire and fury. And then it looked like he fell in love with him. That is the unpredictability that the world now has to deal with. And we will know in the course of time if it's working for him or if it's working for America, and also more importantly, if it's working for the rest of the world, for his adversaries and also for his friends and allies. First, he had a threat passed on to Kim Jong-un which said, you will see the fire and fury like the world has never seen, right? And after all of that, he said, you remember that he made that trip to North Korea, and then he said it seemed like the two leaders had fallen in love. So you don't know where he's coming from. Don't take him at his word. That's the reason a lot of people get hassled by his tweets, by his offhand statements. One thing I'll say for him though, he always talks to the media. He always talks to the media every day. It's like an addiction. And he actually seeks out journalists who might be critical of him or questioning of him, or he might work for organizations that are hostile to him. See the number of interviews, detailed interviews he's given to editors of The Atlantic. Now, Atlantic is the publication whose editor, in error, was added to that chat by his national security advisor about airstrikes in Yemen. That became a big scandal to the extent that he fired his national security advisor. That job is now held simultaneously by Marco Rubio. And yet after that, he invited the same editor of Atlantic for a meal along with his colleague and has spoken with Atlantic multiple times after that as well. In fact, I am sharing with you one more article from The Atlantic talking about some of the same phenomenon. This is an article by Michael Scherer in The Atlantic, and there I quote from that article on what Trump said to Michael Scherer. He said, when Michael Scherer said, what is America first? You say America first one day, then do something else. You say you will not fight anywhere, then you fight someplace. What's going on? So Trump said, I decide what's America first. Among the people Trump is really annoyed and disappointed in his base is podcaster Tucker Carlson, formerly of Fox. He's now a star in his own right, travels in his own plane, right? Buddy of Putin's, wants America to abandon Ukraine and also wants America to stay out of the Middle East fight. He's been very critical of Trump getting involved now in the Middle East. Now, Michael Scherer asks Trump a question about Tucker Carlson that, look, he was your supporter. He's now saying that you're not following the policy of America first and you're looking outwards. And Trump then says, I decide what's America first. And he says to all those wonderful people who want peace, you can't have peace if Iran has a nuclear weapon. That's not peace. Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb. Very simple. Regardless, Israel or no Israel, Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb. And then you can see that what he has said is borne out in his actions as well subsequently. Now, what does Trump actually want? I will take you through some analysis, and some of it comes from H.R. McMaster, who was his national security advisor between 2017 and 18, and he said this in the latest Economist, in fact, just today. Now, while I do that, you will also see on your screen some of these tweets, posts, statements that Trump has made between June 12 and June 23. Whereby history has changed and whereby we've seen the justification and logic to give you this episode of Cut the Clutter. Because this swings between the Madman Theory and also somebody who's incredibly sharp and gets his way by sounding like a madman. You make those conclusions, but I'm giving you the analysis from H.R. McMaster, who knows well. He was his NSA. Remember, in his first term, depending on how you count, he fired between 12 to 16 cabinet officers. And this in this term, it's just the beginning. He's already fired his NSA. He's withdrawn his candidate for UN ambassador. He's also withdrawn his candidate for NASA, etc., etc. So he does those things. He'll keep on doing those things. McMaster, however, has worked closely with him and he knows his mind. And he does not come across as a bitter person. If he came across as a bitter person with grievances, I would not have gone so deep into what he's saying. But he says, what does Trump want? He wants secure borders, less drug trafficking, deregulation, strong armed forces and missile defense, fair and reciprocal trade. That is his idea of fair and reciprocal trade. A vibrant manufacturing base, secure supply chains, energy security. In fact, if you look at all of this and you just put India on the other side, you would not see anything in this formulation that runs contrary to India's interests as India navigates through this America under the new Trump. That said, McMaster also acknowledges it, what I am saying. He's saying most people would agree with it, but most people will also worry about how he wants to achieve this. One view is peace through strength. That is what the American allies would want Trump to focus on, to get peace through strength, because he wants peace. The other is, which is more an excessive internal focus and a worry about inadequate European spending on defense, which means America has to spend too much. So he's going to reduce spending on European security. And that is what is worrying the allies. Similarly, he will keep swinging between rewarding Russia one day and punishing Russia the other day. So he said just the other day that he's going to maybe Putin is not listening. He is attacking civilian targets. Maybe I will impose fresh sanctions on Russia, and I have to pronounce it right. And then he come to Kananaskis in Canada, in Alberta, and says this should be G8. You were very unfair. You threw Russia out. Of course, he's not confused by facts. He said 2014 you threw Russia out. And he said that was because of President Obama and President Trudeau. First of all, Trudeau was not president, not prime minister. And second, in 2014, he wasn't even the prime minister. Stephen Harper was the prime minister. But once again, watch what happened in Kananaskis. None of the leaders present, not even Carney, corrected Donald Trump, because everybody has now figured that you do not correct Donald Trump unless it's a very substantive issue. You just let him carry on. Let's stay with Putin for a minute. Putin has reached out to Trump through flattery in these multiple phone calls, also giving him the impression that both of them have similar grievances. Both of them have been treated very unfairly by their people, but more than their people, by the world in general. That is something that Trump keeps saying all the time. And then there are fake promises of cooperation, prospects of mutually beneficial deals, and also disparagement of rivals, that is Putin's rivals, as weak and corrupt, starting with Zelensky. Trump buys into some of that, or at least he sounds like he buys into some of that. And yet, at one point, he gets fed up of Putin when Putin calls him and says, I can mediate between Iran and Israel. How does Trump react? He says, do me a favor, mediate your own. Let's mediate Russia first. Okay? So once again, he's using unpredictability as his currency of power. And see also how he's dealt with Putin and the Iranians, because those two are adversaries to America's allies. Ukraine is America's ally, and in a way, it's been America's protectorate for these years. And Israel is forever America's ally and protectorate. So first of all, Putin's lectures that there are root causes. Both sides, Putin as well as Iran, say that there are root causes for their behavior. Putin says root causes are NATO expansion into my territory, no respect for me, etc., etc. Similarly, Iran's excuses are there is Zionist atrocities, we are responding to that, and also we are victims of American imperialism, as in American imperialist friends. Friends, obviously, he refers to Israel. He's tossed both of those. About Iran, he said just the other day, they were schoolyard bullies, and now they are bullies no more. And this he said before the strikes, and then we know what happened on Sunday morning, that is June 22. He carried out the strikes. He is now in that war. He's got his ships there. He's got his aircraft there. He's already risked the lives of his pilots. However safe they may be, they went into combat, deep into hostile territory. And now this front is open. Ye morcha khola hua hai. This front is open. Contrast that also with the promise he made on his inauguration. And I will just read that para to you and conclude there. He said on his inauguration day, and I quote, "Our power will stop all wars and bring a new spirit of unity to a world that has been angry, violent, and totally unpredictable." So say about 5 months since then, this world has become angrier, more violent, and even more unpredictable. That's the outcome so far, and we'll keep on watching how the wheel of time turns going ahead.